This summer, I was in the airport in Denver, getting ready to fly back home, and heard, as we often do in airports, that our flight was delayed. Sitting across from a gentleman, he's got sort of some southern western garb on, he's got a big cowboy hat in his lap, he's got the boots on. And he looks at me and he says, "So what do you do?" And I said, "Well, do you want the long or the short version?" He says, "I want the long version." He says all this in a southern western drawl, which I'm not going to try to imitate. So I tell him, I say, we run an organization, a nonprofit agency. I work with my wife and two other partners, and we tell the untold story of black male success. We try to make the invisible visible, and our organization is called Visible Men. We're amidst a humanitarian crisis on our own soil around the underachievement of black boys and men in our country. This underachievement reflects itself in education, reflects itself in unemployment, incarceration, recidivism, early mortality. There's not a realm of society in which it doesn't reflect itself. But amidst all that, we have these wonderful success stories. So many black men and boys who are out there thriving, doing wonderful things in their community. I dive in, I give them statistics, I tell them stories, and then I say, and we've started a school. We've started a charter school for boys in Bradenton, Florida, kindergarten through second grade, will ultimately be kindergarten through eighth grade. And this school is based on this theme. It's character development, it's social development. I dive into the statistics, I give it to them. I feel really good about what I've conveyed. I pause, I look across. He pauses, he says to me, "So let me try to understand this. You work with your wife?" So at that point, it was very, very clear to me that he didn't want any part of where I was going. And honestly, I didn't really want any part of it either. I was tired. I just kind of wanted to get on the plane and get home. But in the work that we do, yes, I work with my wife, the truths around race are inescapable. And that's what I want to talk with you about. A race to truth. Or also sprinting to the finish line of the old, feudal, tired, played, and increasingly useless conversation on race in America. We need to find an absolutely new place on race. We need a breakthrough. As we've just experienced the 50-year anniversary of some major milestones around the civil rights movement, while I see progress, most often I feel like we're in the same conversations, talking about the same things over and over, and it just feels like we need something new. So we need this breakthrough, and it's a breakthrough that has us no longer talking, no more conversations, no more dialogue, and no more thought leaders. We need a breakthrough, a new place, and it's a new place of being, not around this talking and conversation, it's a new place of being, all rooted in truth. Before I go to the next slide, I want to take a second to talk a little bit about this thought leader thing. I am on stage addressing you all as a thought leader. While I'm not sold as to whether or not I'm actually a thought leader, I do want to pause a second and say that my wife and I, we're kind of enjoying the perks of this thought leader thing. Right? So there's like a BMW involved and there's a hotel thing involved. So before we actually put the slash red line through it, just give us a couple of days, right? Let us get our mileage out of this thing. So it's a breakthrough here. And again, we want to sprint to this finish line. Before we dive into some of these truths, just 3 disclaimers. Okay, the first is that I don't have a lot of time. I'm going to generalize. Okay, it's very dangerous to do that. But I trust you all to know that when I say black people or when I say white people, you will infer that it's many or most. And so I'm going to generalize, and you're going to let me. You're not going to give me any grief about that, okay? The next disclaimer I want to give is that my comments are going to be rooted on and centered on black people and white people, right? And they're also going to skew towards black men. Okay, now there are Asian Americans and Indian Americans and Middle Eastern Americans, all those who are clearly impacted by race in America, but I'm not going to really talk about that. I'm going to talk about black people, I'm going to talk about white people, and you're going to let me. The third disclaimer is that what I'm going to convey to you are truths, which means they're not debatable. They're not my opinions, they're just the truths that have emerged on race in America. And so this is my 3rd year here, and I have developed a liking for the little kind of brownie cookie display out there that happens in the afternoon. So when I'm there, there's no coming up to me and saying, you know, that point you made, but just let me enjoy my brownie thing, right? No debating. This is not for you to tell me these are the truths, okay? So as we get going here, I'm hoping everyone can read this because I'm going to ask you, we've talked about education, we've had some professors up here. I want to ask everyone to read this with me, read aloud the second sentence in the great document, Declaration of Independence. The first sentence is a 1-sentence introductory paragraph. This is the first sentence of the second paragraph, the second sentence in the whole document. You've heard it before. Can we read it, please? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thank you. Wonderfully articulate, inspiring words, aspirational. The only problem I have is that it is not true. Our founding fathers could not have held these truths to be self-evident in a slave society. It's not true. So when those of you, and I'm assuming there are many among us, who cringe when you hear the HR manager at your firm or someone in personnel say, we've got the diversity consultant coming in. We have the seminar in diversity, right? It's coming in. You have our founding fathers to thank. Because if there were more voices in that room, different perspectives, they would not have been able to get away with making this claim in a slave society. So, our first truth deals with the reality that our existence as a country is tied to an untruth. It's tied to an untruth. So if you feel yourself in this, decade after decade, same issue, our founding is tied to an untruth. So you say to yourself, well, that's a long time ago. That is a long time ago, right? Social climate was different. Can't we find a way to move on? Can't we find a way to move on? Well, mostly it's white people who are asking of black people that we move on. And black people can't just move on. That is the next truth. Not only can't we move on, we don't want to move on. Yes, we want progress, but what we can't do is forget or deny how much of our identity as black individuals and as a black community is tied to our struggle for those unalienable rights. We don't want to let those go. That's such a part of who we are. So yes, we want progress, but we can't just move on. So any path to a new place, any path to a new state of being around race has to allow us as black people to carry that with us. That's a part of who we are. Another truth, that black people have to stop blaming outside forces for our problems. Right now, I am getting vilified on social media for that comment. Vilified. Have to stop blaming outside forces for our problems. That is not to say that those outside forces don't exist. They do. I will say it again. This is not to say that those outside forces don't exist. They do. There is racism, there is discrimination, there is profiling, there are gross inequities in our criminal justice system. The list goes on. These are real outside forces. They exist, and they are tremendous challenges. Such tremendous challenges that the energy that goes into blaming them has to be allocated differently. It has to be allocated into solving them and then overcoming them. And we have increasing evidence over decades and decades and decades that they can be overcome. Politics undermine progress on race relations in America. If you are in a conversation on race, and the word Democrat or Republican or conservative or progressive or this starts to come in, just know, you can stay in the conversation, but just know that you're heading exactly the opposite direction that you need to go to find a new place of being on race. Politics are divisive in their nature. We root ourselves in our positions on politics independent of whether or not there is truth in them. Politics undermine progress on race relations in America. The next truth, issues of poverty are often mistaken for issues of race. The hardships of poverty, criminologists, sociologists, educators know that it is poverty that is behind many of these hardships that we see, and not race. But often they take the face of a black person. My wife and I, without even knowing that we were doing a wonderful thing for the education of our two young boys, we recently moved, a little over 2 years ago, we moved from the DC area, moved to where we are now in Florida. And one of the things our boys are exposed to now, which we could never have anticipated the impact, our boys on a daily basis see poor white people. Poor white people. And what that has done for their understanding of how the world works is something we could have never anticipated. They don't associate poor with black. They don't associate homelessness with black. They understand that these things come in many, many colors. The concept of blackness is limiting. The concept of blackness is limiting. So blackness is a term that is used within the black community, sometimes outside of the black community, but the idea here is that it defines who we are as a people. But the problem is the way that we have allowed this construct to evolve, it's too narrow. So there is a certain way one is black, one represents themselves as black. And if you are black and you are representing yourself differently, then you are outside of the scope of blackness. It is limiting. I gotta pause for a second. I am having a conversation with a room full of white people and talking about blackness. Do me a favor, right? So on Monday, right, you'll get back to the office and One of your colleagues or coworkers will say, this is a Nantucket project, and what is that thing about? Look them dead in the eye and say, it's about blackness. And keep walking, right? Just walk, no explanation, nothing, just hit them with it, right? I looked out the other, I was thinking, just this morning, I was sitting over there, I was like, my goodness, the elephants here are white, right? What are we doing, right? What are we gonna do? Yeah. So, personal responsibility and self-sustainability, right? This is a common sort of cry of white people, often not around black people, but they say we need to focus on self-sustainability and personal responsibility. Okay, that sounds great to me, and I will sign up. If you are on that campaign, then you must lobby with everything you have for us to overhaul our embarrassingly deficient public education system. Okay? Thank you. So if you talk about personal responsibility and self-sufficiency, you must be on board with overhauling our education system. Black people need to be as committed to mobilizing against intra-race transgressions as we are against inter-race transgressions. Okay, so black people over years, over decades, over centuries, we have shown an amazing ability to mobilize and act, right, when we feel as if we are wronged. It is one of our wonderful, sort of wonderfully positive traits and a trademark of our spirit. We need to continue to do that, and we need to be much more honest with ourselves around issues that are happening within our own community that certainly affect our community and far beyond, right? So you look at some of our major cities, right? Chicago's been getting a lot of attention for its murder rate, right? Much of that crime is black people committing murders on other black people. Not that it's any better if black people are committing murders on other white people. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we should be outraged about that. We should be outraged when we find that too many of our men in the black community are helping to conceive children, but not helping to raise them. We should be outraged about that, and we should mobilize. We should be outraged when in our neighborhoods, our public schools are absolutely terrible in failing our students. We should demand that they be fixed or closed. So I want us to mobilize in those realms as well. The next truth is the truth with which we have to contend most fiercely and most honestly. So if we arrive at a point where we say, it's been a lot of years, over 2 centuries, since the untruth of the Declaration of Independence, that particular line, but let's say that we as a society have come to a place where, yes, we recognize that all men are created equally, right? I mean, you look, there's not a profession, there's not a field, there's not an industry where you can't find a man of color, where you can't find women, right? So we're created equally. The truth of the matter is, while we might have accepted that, all men are not valued equally. And this is the truth with which we must contend most fiercely and most honestly. Civil rights movement, 50 years ago, right? 50 years ago, still searching for the unalienable rights. All men are not valued equal. So we have come off recently months of reflection, antagonism, passion, you name it, around the Trayvon Martin tragedy. Trayvon Martin, 17-year-old boy, killed while heading home with a bag of Skittles and an Arizona iced tea in his father's neighborhood. I'm not going to rehash the details. I'm not going to rehash the conflict. I'm not going to rehash any of those things. All I know is that he is dead. with a bag of Skittles and an Arizona iced tea. It is hard for me, who has pledged to convey truth to you, to not make the statement that if Trayvon Martin was a white boy, he would be alive today. I have to make that statement. So that's, where are we? 19 months ago. 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, Jonathan Ferrell, Charlotte, North Carolina, crashes his car, crashes out the back window, climbs out the back window, goes to a house, knocks on the window, startles the occupant calls the police arrive. A few seconds later, Jonathan Ferrell's dead. Unarmed, 24 years old, 25th birthday next month, was engaged to be married. That's why he had moved back to Charlotte. We're planning a wedding, now they're planning a funeral. All men are not valued equally. So to close, the path to a new place of being is paved with dignity, inspiration, and love. Can we proffer dignity and afford dignity to every single individual with whom we come into contact? Can we inspire them to be bigger and better than they are? And most importantly, can you reach the broadest dimensions of our capacity to love and expand who you love and how you love them? Thank you.